We all know the image, the black uniform, the silver skull insignia, the Totenkopf. It's a symbol burned into history, a mark of men who guarded the gates of hell on earth. We know what they did inside the camps. Dachau, Auschwitz, Treblinka. The story of their crimes is well told. But this isn't that story. This is the story of what happens after. What happens when the war ends, the gates swing open, and the guards are on the outside, looking in, when the system they served collapses into ash and rubble for thousands of men who wore the skull. May 1945 wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a second war. A war fought in courtrooms, in hiding, across continents. A war for their own survival. What happened to the SS-Totenkopf guards after World War II? If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Nicholas Foxman's History of the Concentration Camps and the official records of the Nuremberg military tribunals. Now back to the story. The end came with chaos. In the spring of 1945, the German Reich is collapsing. For the men of the SS-Totenkopfverbände, the orders are simple. Erase the evidence. Death marches empty the camps. Prisoners are shot by the thousands on the roadsides. Documents are burned in roaring bonfires. But you can't burn millions of bodies. You can't erase thousands of witnesses. As Allied tanks roll through Germany, the guards face a choice: fight, flee, or hide. Many choose to hide. They rip the skull insignia from their collars. They burn their uniforms, trading the black wool for civilian clothes, for the gray-green of the regular army, for anything that doesn't scream murderer. They join columns of retreating soldiers. They melt into the flood of German refugees fleeing the Red Army in the east. They use forged papers, they use new names, they become farmers, mechanics, bricklayers. They try to disappear, but the Allies are hunting American and British and Soviet war crimes. Investigation units are moving right behind the front lines. Their job is to secure evidence and arrest suspects. At camps like Buchenwald, liberated on April 11, 1945, investigators find rosters, guard schedules, administrative files that survived the fires. They find witnesses, skeletal but alive. Who can point a finger and name a name? The hunt begins with lists, a name on a piece of paper, a tattoo of a blood type under the left arm, a telltale sign of SS membership, a testimony from a survivor. One by one, the guards are pulled from prisoner of war cages, from farmhouses, from their own homes. The uniform is gone, but the past is not. For many, the first taste of justice comes not from a court, but at the end of a rifle. At the liberation of Dachau on April 29, 1945, soldiers from the U.S. 7th Army find train cars packed with 2,000 rotting corpses. They find piles of emaciated dead inside the camp. The rage is immediate, and it is violent. In the hours that follow, American soldiers and some of the surviving inmates execute at least 50 camp guards on the spot. Some are lined up against a coal yard wall and shot down. Others are killed where they are found. The event is later investigated as the Dachau Liberation Reprisals. No American soldier is ever punished. For these 50 guards, their post-war life lasted only a few hours. For thousands of others, it would be decided in a courtroom. The legal reckoning begins at Nuremberg. Starting November 20th, 1945, the world watches as the highest-ranking Nazis face the International Military Tribunal. But the big trial is just the beginning. The tribunal makes a critical decision. On October 1st, 1946, it declares the Schutzstaffel, the SS, a criminal organization. This single ruling is a legal earthquake. It means that membership alone, if you joined or remained knowing its criminal purposes, is a crime. It opens the door to prosecute not just the architects of the Holocaust, but the thousands of men who carried it out, the clerks, the drivers, the guards, the men who wore the Totenkopf. Now, the Allies can hold their own trials. The British hold theirs at Nuremberg. For the staff of Bergen-Belsen, the Americans hold theirs at Dachau, the very camp where the atrocities occurred. The first Dachau camp trial begins on November 15, 1945. The defendants are not generals or politicians. They are the men who ran this one camp, 40 of them. You have the former commandant, Martin Weiss. You have the doctors, the administrators, and the guards. They sit in the dock, wearing ill-fitting civilian clothes. They are charged under a single count: violation of the laws and usages of war. The evidence is overwhelming. Survivors take the stand, one after another, describing beatings, starvation, medical experiments, random killings. The trial is swift. It lasts less than a month. On December 13th, 1945, the verdict is read. Of the 40 men in the dock, 36 are sentenced to death by hanging. The message is clear. Following orders is not a defense. Being a small part of a big machine does not grant you immunity. The trapdoor of the gallows opens again and again. At the same time, the British are holding their own trial, the Belsen trial, in a gymnasium in Nuremberg from September 17th to November 17th, 1945. 45 former SS men and women face justice. The star defendant is Joseph Kramer, the commandant of Bergen-Belsen, previously an officer at Auschwitz. The press calls him the Beast of Belsen. Next to him sits Irma Grese, a 22-year-old female guard known for her sadism. Photographs from the liberation of Belsen, mounds of skeletal corpses being bulldozed into mass graves, are shown to the court. Kramer doesn't deny the conditions. He says it wasn't his fault. Typhus, lack of food, Allied bombing of the supply lines. He claims he was just an administrator doing his job. The court doesn't buy it. Joseph Kramer is sentenced to death. So is Irma Grese. On December 13th, 1945, the same day as the Dachau verdicts, they are hanged by the British executioner, Albert Pierrepoint. That day, in two different parts of Germany, 47 people who ran the Nazi camps are condemned to die. The hunt is working. Justice seems inevitable. But for every guard who faced a judge, there were others who slipped through the net. The system wasn't perfect. It was overwhelmed. Tens of thousands of potential war criminals were in custody. Investigators were overworked. And some of the most guilty were the most clever at hiding. This is where the story turns, from mass trials to individual manhunts that would last for decades. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the archives of the Simon Wiesenthal Center and German federal court records. Now back to the story. Consider the case of Franz Stangl. Stangl was not just a guard. He was a commandant, first at the Sobibor extermination camp, then at Treblinka. Between those two camps, he oversaw the murder of nearly 1 million people. He was an expert in mass killing. When the war ended, Stangl was arrested by the Americans in 1945 for his role in the euthanasia program, but his identity as the commandant of Treblinka was not yet known. He was just another prisoner in a camp in Linz, Austria. In 1947, he simply walked out. He escaped. From there, he began a journey that thousands of other Nazis took. The path was called the Ratlines. With help from a network of sympathizers, including a Catholic bishop in Rome named Alois Hudal, Stangl was given a Red Cross passport with a fake name. He traveled to Syria, where he lived for 3 years with his family. In 1951, they moved again, this time to Brazil. In Sao Paulo, Franz Stangl got a job at the Volkswagen factory. For 16 years, he lived a normal life. He was a good employee, a family man, a ghost who had vanished. But some people don't forget. A Nazi hunter named Simon Wiesenthal was on his trail. For years, Wiesenthal gathered clues, followed leads. Finally, in 1967, he got a tip. Stangl's location was confirmed. Wiesenthal passed the information to the German authorities. The Brazilian government arrested Franz Stangl at his home. He did not resist. He was extradited to West Germany. His trial began in 1970. He was charged with the co-responsibility for the murder of 900,000 people. The evidence was undeniable. He was sentenced to life in prison. On June 28th in 1971, just 19 hours after a final interview where he admitted his guilt, saying, "My conscience is clear about what I did myself," Franz Stangl died of heart failure in his prison cell. He was caught. But it took 22 years. While Stangl was found, others remained shadows. Take the case of Aribert Heim, an Austrian doctor. Heim was an SS officer at the Mauthausen concentration camp for just 2 months in 1941. But in those 2 months, he earned a nickname, Doctor. Death. Witnesses said he performed horrific experiments without anesthesia. He would inject poison, including gasoline, directly into the hearts of prisoners, just to see how long it took them to die. After the war, Heim was captured by American forces, but was released for unknown reasons. He worked as a gynecologist in Baden-Baden, Germany. He lived a quiet, prosperous life, but German investigators were building a case against him. In 1962, an arrest warrant was issued. When the police went to his house, he was gone. He had been tipped off. And so began one of the longest manhunts in history. For decades, Aribert Heim was one of the most wanted Nazi fugitives in the world. Sightings were reported in Spain and South America, but he was never caught. The Simon Wiesenthal Center offered a huge reward for his capture. The story took a strange turn in 2009. A German television station and the New York Times investigated and found a dusty briefcase in a hotel room in Cairo, Egypt. Inside were Heim's personal documents. According to the papers, and interviews with his son and acquaintances, Aribert Heim had been living in Cairo for years under the name Tariq Hussein Farid. He had converted to Islam. He had died of intestinal cancer on August 10, 1992. He had evaded justice to the very end. His body was never found. He was declared legally dead by a German court in 2012. A briefcase full of papers was all that was left. No trial, no verdict, just a ghost story. As the 1940s turned into the 1950s, the world changed. The new enemy was the Soviet Union. The Cold War had begun. The Western Allies needed a strong West Germany as a partner against communism. The political will for aggressive, widespread denazification began to fade. Trials became less frequent. Sentences became lighter. A legal concept called Befehlsnotstand, the necessity of following orders, which was rejected at Nuremberg, started to be accepted as a defense in German courts. Thousands of former SS men, low-level guards who had been sentenced to prison terms, were granted amnesty and released early. By the mid-1950s, most of them were free. They went back to their lives. They became police officers, civil servants, businessmen. The past was buried for a while, but the silence was broken in 1958. In the German city of Ulm, a trial against former members of an Einsatzkommando, a mobile killing squad, sparked a public outcry. People realized how many murderers were still living freely among them. In response, West Germany established a new agency, the Central Office of the State Justice Administrations for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes, based in Ludwigsburg. Its job was to hunt down the remaining Nazi criminals on German soil. Their work led to one of the most important trials in post-war German history, the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials. From 1963 to 1965, 22 former SS personnel who had served at Auschwitz faced a German court. The trial was a national reckoning. For the first time, German society was forced to confront the details of the Holocaust in its own legal system, presented by German prosecutors. Witnesses were flown in from around the world. The testimony was harrowing. The commander's adjutant, Robert Molke, was there. The guard who threw Zyklon B into the gas chambers, Oswald Kaduk, was there. The verdicts came in August 1965. 6 were sentenced to life in prison. Others received shorter sentences. 3 were acquitted. The Frankfurt trial was a landmark, but it also revealed a deep problem. German law made it very difficult to convict someone of murder unless you could prove they personally acted with cruelty or sadism beyond just following orders. For the thousands of guards who simply ran the system, who herded people to the gas chambers, who shot prisoners at the camp wall, who stood watch on the towers, it was hard to prove they acted out of personal malice. They were part of a machine. The German legal system was designed to prosecute individual crimes, not systematic, industrial-scale murder. Many former guards were tried in the decades that followed, but convictions were rare and sentences were often light. So what happened to the average Totenkopf guard? The man who wasn't a commandant like Stengel or a sadist like Heim? The vast majority were never prosecuted. Of the estimated 70,000 people who worked as guards in the Nazi concentration camp system, only a tiny fraction ever faced a court. After a few years in a prisoner of war camp, they went home. They rebuilt their lives. They told their families they had been simple soldiers, fighting on the Eastern Front. They collected their pensions. They grew old. In the 2000s, journalists and historians began to find them, living in quiet suburbs in Germany, Austria, the United States, Canada, men in their 80s and 90s. When asked about their time as guards, many showed no remorse. They said they didn't see anything. They claimed they were only guarding the perimeter. They were cooks. They were medics. They were just following orders. They had forgotten, or they chose to forget. They lived, and they died, as free men. The hunt never truly ended. Even in the 21st century, a few last cases went to trial. In 2011, John Demjanjuk was convicted in Germany for being an accessory to the murder of 28,000 Jews as a guard at the Sobibor camp. He was 91 years old. The case established a new legal precedent. You didn't need to prove a specific act of killing. Being a guard at an extermination camp, a cog in the machine of death, was enough to be found guilty of accessory to murder. This opened the door for a final wave of prosecutions against the last living members of the SS, men and women in their late 90s, a bookkeeper at Auschwitz, a secretary at Stutthof, a guard at Sachsenhausen. They were tried in their wheelchairs. They were sentenced years after their memories had faded. It was justice, arriving at the very last second of the very last hour. But these last symbolic trials cannot hide the larger truth. In 1958, the Central Office for the Investigation of Nazi Crimes was established in Ludwigsburg. It seemed like a promise that Germany would finally and fully confront its past, that no killer would be safe, But look at the numbers. For the single most infamous camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau, it is estimated that about 6,500 SS personnel who served there survived the war. Of that number, the Ludwigsburg office, in its more than 60 years of work, investigated hundreds. But in the end, in West German courts, fewer than 50 were ever convicted. 6,500 guards, fewer than 50 convictions. The trials ended, the files closed, the skull remains,